Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Board Explorer Live. I'm Richard Bobes, and we're reading Narrow Boat by LTC Rolt, and we're on chapter 13, I think. Something like that. Or is it 14? Chapter 13, that's it. That's what we're reading today, and I think 14 as well, because it's a smallish chapter. Hello to Audrey. Good morning. Hello, lovely Julia. Hello, Philip. Hello, Linda Kane, giving me some advice. Yes, my chicken that I bought, I did leave in the fridge, and it did go horrible colour. However, I've been to the shops, and I'm doing chili con carne tonight. Good morning, Judith. Yes. So, and I also went and looked for flour. Flour, it seems to be the hardest thing to get hold of. Curiously, there are places on Amazon that you can buy flour, and it's a lot more expensive buying their great big bags of flour than Morrison's are selling per kilogram. Morrison's, when they've got it, they're selling it at 60p a kilogram of strong white flour. And you can buy 16 kilograms for about 25 quid on average, which makes that a lot more expensive, even though you're buying a larger quantity. And there's a free delivery with that, so presumably half of the money is going into the delivery. And I've tried to trace other sources. There doesn't seem to be anyone. The supermarket seem to be the cheapest, even though, you can go to other places. I thought maybe one could get straight from the mill would be good. Everybody seems to be baking their own bread. The demand on flour has gone crazy. Everybody, even these big places with the big sacks, are out of stock. Morrison's didn't have any this morning when I went in. I thought, oh, so it's a bit of a bugger. But they did have loaves that big for 50p. Yeah, so people can't get rid of the stuff. Good morning to everybody. Lovely to see you. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning to Rita, to Mike, to Michael, to Graham, to Ramiboo, to TurboStream, to Fiona, to Liam, and to John. Good morning. And to Jim and to Mick. Lovely to see you. Thank you for coming along on this. Here, where I am, the morning has a bit of sunshine. It's quite nice. Apparently Asda, I don't know if you're going to Asda, Linda, but if you're going to Asda, apparently they also do. It's either bread flour or strong flour. You know what to get. Thank you for the chicken advice. I should have done that. But we're going to rain. It's going to rain down this neck of the woods between about 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Quite heavy rain. So just let you know. Right, let's crack on with this. This is... I should just mention, if there's a knock at the door, I am expecting a package. Well, Billy and Sharif are expecting a package. That's my son and his girlfriend are expecting a package to be picked up, a return, and I'm actually expecting something I've bought to come. It probably won't come till about 6 o'clock tonight. But you know what it is? You've got to hang around inside. I don't want them to leave this particular one outside. Tell you more about that another time. Anyway, so this is chapter 13, and the title of the chapter is simply called Leicester. Leicester. Because the city of Leicester has exerted its urban influence on the countryside over a wide area, the 16 miles of canal from Foxton to Ayleston Mill within the city boundary had little to commend them. The first few miles between the villages of Smeaton, Westerby and Gumley, perched upon its hilltop, were pleasant enough, but when we emerged from Saddleton Tunnel, it was to behold the first portent of things to come. A vivid rash of jerry-built houses surrounding Fleckney. A beautiful tree-bordered pound by Wiston Park a mile or so beyond, and the sylvan surroundings of Newton Harcourt were the last outposts of a countryside in retreat, for the next village, South Wigston, had become industrialised, a fragment of a city slum dropped into green fields, while Blabby was a typical urban dormitory. Railway power lines and roads lined the ribbon development, began to converge on either hand, until as we approached the latter place, we sighted, standing beside the canal, what we at first took to be an ultra-modern factory of the type which disgraces the Great West Road. On closer approach, however, the building revealed itself as a monster gin palace, the ultimate apotheosis of brewer's taste manufactured in a super cinema style. There could be no doubt of its commercial success, for the place was crowded with clerks, typists, mill hands of Leicester, while a score of white-jacketed barmen hurried ceaselessly to and fro. Only American slang can adequately convey the atmosphere. It was 100%. In place of quality, an overwhelming quantity being substituted upon the same principle as the film producer's 1,000 extras, herd of stamping elephants, or triple revolving stages. In one vast room there was dancing in progress, and an effete young man was crooning into a microphone, his accent a curious blend of natural Leicestershire and cultivated American. In another, equally popular, there must have been at least a dozen dartboards. The huge expanse of car park was filled with small saloons, as like as a row of beans, and there was even a playground where the future citizens of Leicester might disport themselves, while Daddy sank a pint or so of draught bitter, and Mummy had a glass of nourishing stout, or sipped a more refined port and lemon. The friendly, intimate atmosphere of the English inn was entirely lacking, and the quality of the beer was execrable. From our position at the bar, we could see Cressy at her moorings beside the towpath, and our drink was summarily interrupted when we espied several boys of 14 or 15 years of age clamber aboard and walk unconcernedly about the aft deck. When we were in the country districts, we never felt the slightest concern about leaving the boat unattended, but we soon discovered that this behaviour was typical of urban manners. The contrast was significant. We found that grown-ups were little better, for on more than one occasion when we were passing through a lock, some mother would satisfy her child's curiosity by lifting up and thrusting its head through any window that happened to be open. It took us over an hour to cover the remaining distance from Balby to the tail of King's Lock at Ayleston, where we left the canal and entered the River Soar, from whose ancient name of Leicester the city derived its title. We found, unexpectedly, good moorings at Ayleston Mill, and later in the day journeyed into the heart of Leicester by that obsolete and ear-shattering form of transport, the tram car. In the 17th century, the knitting of hosiery and other textiles became the staple employment in the cottages of 100 rural communities in Leicestershire, but the invention of the power-driven frame in the early 1900s silenced the hand frames of the village forever, and the industry soon became concentrated in a few large mills in the city. The early industrial revolution has completely changed the face of Leicester, and a few smoke-blackened fragments, scattered like ashes among the beetling warehouses, are all that remain of the medieval stronghold of the Red Rose. One of these remnants, an old house adjoining what little is left of Dumont's great castle, is reputed to have witnessed that scene immortalised by Shakespeare, the death of John of Gaunt. Surrounded by grimy mills and reeking chimneys, the famous words, this other Eden, demi-paradise, assume a quality of bitter irony undreamt of by their author. Two features of Leicester that I shall remember: the market and the church of St. Mary de Castro. After our experience at Market Harborough, we were not very sanguine about the former, expecting it to be lurking in some gloomy hall redolent of fish. Instead, we came upon a great square filled with row upon row of booths, and resounding with a babel of hucksters crying their wares. Competition was particularly keen among the numerous vendors of fruit and vegetables, each doing his best to shout down his neighbour. "5p a pile of plums!" one would brawl until his face grew red until his face grew as red as his wares, and the adjoining school would cut the price to 14p, when, not to be outdone, he would change his tune to a defiant £5 for 15p. There you are now, that's the best value in town. Besides these fruit sellers, there were stalls piled high with seconds, blemished china from the potteries, stalls of meat, fish and poultry, stalls of moth-ridden second-hand clothes, old limp boots and shoes, bookstalls stacked with dog-eared volumes of Victorian sermons, tattered paperbacks and faded editions of White Merville or the Waverley novels. Cheap jacks were offering bright baubles of every sort, and the sweet stalls were heavy with golden brown toffee apples at a halfpenny each. The church of St. Mary de Castro, which rears its graceful soot-blackened spire from the top of the castle mound, was once the chapel of the House of Lancashire, when proud Bolingbroke usurped the crown in 1399. The earldom of Leicester was merged into the monarchy, and the chapel became a parish church, which, lacking patronage and benefice, fell into a disastrous state of repair. Since that time it has suffered at the hands of many restorers, although it still presents many features of great interest. There is not only a fine north door of Norman work, but a magnificent example of a Norman triple sedilia in the south wall of the chancel. Double-shafted pillars supporting the characteristic arches of dog-tooth moulding in a fine state of preservation too. From the point of view of the archaeologist, this was undoubtedly the greatest treasure in the earth. But it was the early English triple sedilia in the south aisle that I most admired. The years have dealt more hardy with it. Much of the carving suffered from damp, but two interpretations of the same motif afford interesting contrast. To my eyes, the solid Norman work looked ponderous and disproportionate, besides the airy grace of the early English shafts, so perfectly in harmony and balance with the graceful spring of the vaulting. One feature of the church must be quite unique, and that is the tower. When originally built, it was remote from the body of the church, like its fellow at Evesham. But when at a later date the enormous south aisle was constructed to house the second collegiate church, the tower was enclosed so that it now stands upon its foundations within the body of the church. We emerged from the cool dimness and quiet of this most ancient place into the full blaze of the summer's afternoon. The sun was shining out of a clear blue sky, and in the city streets the scorching pavements with their jostling crowds, the fumes of traffic and the blaring horns made Cressy and the cool river seem more than ever desirable. We caught a tram without more ado and clanked back to the comparative peace of the Aylstone, resolved to slip our moorings and head for open country the following morning. The River Sour, or Sour, is it? Sour, is Leicester's back door. And as back doors are apt to do, It revealed domestic offices, it reveals domestic offices which usually remain discreetly hidden from the eye of visitors. Broad squares and pretentious public buildings proclaim the city's commercial prosperity to the traveller by road. But the waterborne traveller sees a very different picture. This is no less than the ugliness and squalor which underlie the superficial pomp and circumstance of all cities. We saw the reeking gasworks, mountainous refuse dumps, the power station with its gigantic steam-capped cooling towers, great mills pulsating with machinery, rising sheer from the water's edge, and above all, the countless mean streets where dwelt the servants of these monsters. As we drifted along, passing beneath innumerable bridges and winding this way and that through a canyon of factory walls, I was extremely thankful for the presence of the towing path, which accompanies the river throughout its navigable course. For every now and again the channel would divide, one branch passing into a lock, while the other shot over a thundering weir, and as both were usually invisible, only the path's unfailing guidance prevents the stranger from losing the navigable channel and heading for a weir on a swift current. There is a great deal to be said against river navigations from the commercial point of view, as the pioneer James Brindley realised. For, writes Smiles, he likened water in a river flowing down a declivity to a furious giant running along and overturning everything. Whereas, he said, if you lay the giant flat upon his back, he loses all his force and becomes completely passive, whatever size he may be. The truth of this simple allegory is proved at least once every winter when the Soar, or Sour, swollen by floodwater, becomes unnavigable, and boats are held up sometimes for weeks on end. At such times, locks are liable to damage, headroom under bridges become very restricted, and narrow boats can scarcely make headway against the current. Travelling downstream in flood time is extremely dangerous because unless a boat can maintain a speed greater than that of the current, it loses its steerage way, drifts out of control, and is swept over the weirs. This fate has befallen over-venturous boatmen on more than one occasion, and even when the river is at normal level, the effect of the current has to be allowed for when turning broadside across the head of a weir to enter a lock channel. Successfully navigating these hazards, we presently entered a long, artificial cut away from the river. The water here was black and foul, the surroundings depressing in the extreme, so that we were glad when, after passing the vast Wolsey underwear mills, we sighted the river again and the first glimpse of open country. We'd seen enough of Leicester. Herbs had one more card to play, however, for we found the Belgrave Lock, through which we had to pass to rejoin the river, was full of dead rats. The churning of our screw set their bloated, putrefying bodies bobbing up and down in horrible semblance of life. Had there been a local rat week? We pondered. Two imperturbable fishermen who sat on the lock side, gazing raptly at the water, discounted the theory, for they appeared to accept the melodious corpses as part of the normal order of things. Perhaps Leicester breeds a fortuitous indifference to the more unpleasant aspects of city life. That was chapter 13. Let's quickly catch up with everybody. It was a shorter chapter than I thought, actually. Booker's Cash and Carry still have 16 bags of flour. You can turn it into self-raising by a teaspoon of baking powder. Oh, right, Northern Narrow. I wonder how much it is, and can an individual buy it? Liam says you're going to need. Are you going to read A Shepherd's Life? I'm reading that after I heard it mentioned here. A Shepherd's Life. I have in the other room. I have in the other room actually, by W.H. Hudson. I'm sure it's there. Hang on a second. I'm just going to go and have a look. Bear with me. Here he is. A Shepherd's Life. Yeah, I could read that. I kind of not half. What have I read? A tiny bit. To get onto the shepherd bit. There's a lot of preamble, isn't there? I haven't read it. I haven't read it all, but it looks. It is a lovely book. What else have we got here? Hang on a minute. Good day, Vobesy, John Blake. Good day to you. Sorry, I'm just catching up with some of the comments. So yes, I could read that. That's a good choice. Cash and carry. Yes, I wonder how much they charge and whether they sell to an individual living on your own. As long as you have a freezer, you can buy small packets of. Yes, that's true. I hate waste. Well, I hate waste. I freeze bread and sausages in small portions. That's true. Having strangers, kids aboard a boat. Yes, that would pique my annoyance. If you've got a boat, I mean, that's a tantamount to trespass, isn't it? When the kids just climb on board thinking it's perfectly all right to do so. How awful is that? Everyone's talking about Michael Angel. Float my boat were having problem turning their boat because of that in one of their videos. Yes. It's not an easy. Oh, River Saw, pronounced Saw. Thank you, Adrian. That's interesting because that's quite near you, isn't it, Leicester? I imagine you know all these places. That's the thing. What I meant to do again. I meant to have a quick look on the map beforehand. Almost feel I'm aboard, says the lovely Julia. With those descriptions, I wish I could command the English language and talk the way he does. How do you develop that skill to write with those amazing descriptions? Absolutely, so that there they are, travelling down this black canal with rats bobbing up and down all round, dead rats, and yet he describes them. The way he describes the churning of our screw set their bloated, putrefying bodies bobbing up and down in a horrid semblance of life. Isn't that beautiful? And then again, he says, they've discounted the theory, for they appeared to accept the melodious corpses as part of the normal things. Melodious. Malodorous. Is it melodious? Malodorous corpses. Yes, I'm always mispronouncing words. I'm so impressed that you know where to lay your hands on one book amongst the hundreds you have. They're organised. No, they're not organised. It just so happens that it was on my desk because I had been looking at it. That's the only reason. If you'd mentioned a different book, that would have been. I'm still trying to find London Belongs to Me, and it's on a shelf, but I cannot find it. And I love it. Anyway. Let's do the next chapter, which is chapter 14. Crossington and Barrow-on-Soar. Leicester has not marched so far into the country to the north. Its frontiers, the suburban villages of Birstall and Thurmaston on the Fosse Way, were soon past, and we found ourselves in open fields at last, with the tall fingers of the mill chimneys fading in the smoke haze astern. Near the village of Wanlip, we entered another artificial channel, the river making a wide circle to the westward, and before rejoining it at Crossington, we met the little river Reek, flowing through a green tunnel of overhanging trees on its way from Melton Mowbray. From this point onwards, the river scene would have delighted Cotman or Constable, and it was hard to believe that the same stream a few miles back had seemed little better than an open sewer. Having achieved our object of getting clear of the city, we went no farther that day, but moored up in the water meadows belong the lock of Crossington Mill. As is the case with everything else in life, the true appreciation of travel lies in its contrasts, which it constantly provides. For just as those who have not known great sorrow cannot rejoice, so ugliness must forever be the measure of beauty. With this simple truth in mind, we'd decided on a route which did not seek deliberately to avoid industrial districts, and this evening at Cossington fully justified our choice. For had it not been for the city we had so lately left, the evening light in which the clouds of gnats were dancing their intricate measures had never seemed so golden, nor the meadows looked so richly green, nor could the eye have delighted in the stooping willows and darker plane trees that, shadowing the water, wrought cunning tapestries of image and substance. There was a new magic in the stillness, broken only by the lazy thunder of the weir, because the day before we had lurched down the Aylstone Road in the Leicester Corporation tram. That the river had still better things in store we discovered the next day when we reached the lock at Barrow-upon-Soar. It was one of those blazing noons where everything is warm to the touch. The wooden lock beams, the crumbling brickwork of the bridge, even the grass had a sensuous warmth, as though the earth beneath was fresh. The wall of the lock cottage was covered with a climbing rose in full bloom, a wealth of white and gold flowers clustering about the windows and filling the air with their fragrance. The murmur of the bees that were just busy about them mingled with the cool plashing of the thin jets of water which were leaking through the chinks in the lock gates to make so drowsy a summer song that we could scarcely summon the energy to lift the paddles. We were already in two minds whether or not to continue our journey to Loughborough as we had originally planned, but the sight of the lovely reach below the dock decided matters. We moored up and did no more voyaging for 4 days. Even so, our departure was determined, not because we had grown tired of our surroundings, but for the reason that we feared a break in the perfect weather, or that some chance circumstance might conspire to spoil our recollection of such a time that falls into the lot of the average mortal all too rarely in these unhappy times. On one side, our moorings were sheltered and screened by the almost precipitous bank of Barrow Cliff, thickly clothed with trees and undergrowth, which afforded welcome in the heat of the day. Opposite, we looked out over level fields towards the village of Corndon, part screened by circling elms and backed by the wooded heights of Charnwood Forest. In the haze of cloudless days, this farther distance grew indistinct, assuming a quality of blue that was almost indistinct from that of the sky itself. But by night, under a harvest moon which was near to full, the high skyline of the forest stood forth as darkly clear as a woodcut. One day we went into the village of Woodhouse Eaves, that lovely name, and climbed up through the pungent, sun-drenched bracken to the summit of Beacon Hill, one of the highest points in the forest, commanding a mighty expanse of the Midland Plain. Later, When we had returned to Barrow, hot and dusty after our walk, we hired a rowing boat, and in the cool of the evening rowed around the unnavigable loop by the river by Quorn Hall. Our row ended appropriately at the Navigation Inn, its stone-flanked bar overlooking the white foaming fall of the weir. Here the mild draught beer, the Derby brew, was the best we encountered on the whole of our journey, a fitting climax to the day. Determined to make the most of the perfect weather, we had all our meals in the open, and in the evening sat on the deck until long after darkness had fallen, watching that last flush of colour drain from the sky and the golden moon ride up over the shoulder of Charnwood. As the air cooled, the river smoked with rising mist, weaving thin white veils, lambent in the moonlight, which drifted away over the fields, a ghostly flood no higher than a man's waist. We were constantly reminded of the wild company about us by repeated scruffling sounds in the reeds, or by the sleepy clucking of a moorhen. Often in the daylight we would catch sight of a small brown water vole squatting on his hindquarters in some green arbour of the bank, not 4 feet away, nibbling imperturbably at a juicy morsel held between his 4 paws. So close did they venture to caress his bow that it was often the comfortable sound of their munching that had attracted our attention. Most of our most entertaining companions, however, were the little grebe or dabchicks in their summer plumage of black with bright chestnut cheeks and throat. We had not encountered them before, and to watch them was constant amusement and delight. Their dive was like a conjuring trick. So swiftly it was performed, and with so little trace, that one moment there would be a small bird swimming sedately across the river, and the next, empty water, unbroken by the faintest ripple. Most of their time was spent singly in the pursuit of food, but every now and again one would decide to play a practical joke on his fellow, and diving would startle him by popping up like a cork almost opposite. This was invariably the prelude to a wild game of hide-and-seek under and over the water, accompanied by loud laughing cries, more melodious, but not unlike the harbinger of rain, the call of the green woodpecker. Just as the memory of some melody can become inextricably associated in the mind with certain persons, events, or places, so shall I always recall these halcyon days at Barrow upon Soar when I hear the cry of the dabchick. I have absolutely no idea what a dabchick is, but there we are. It's a similar experience on a quiet pitch in a camper van, watching the day slip away. Yes, I bet. That is definitely a book to be read aloud rather than read to oneself. Which one is that? The Shepherd's Life. Is that what you mean, Linda? The book that is to be read aloud. How are we doing? I haven't read this one, but we could just get this one done as well. One more little mini chapter. This is chapter 15, The Bell Founders. I haven't pre-read this one, so we'll see how we go. When we reluctantly cast off from our moorings at Barrow, it was not long before we once left the river for an artificial channel, and presently found ourselves approaching the town of Loughborough. The surroundings were an unprepossessing replica of Leicester, though fortunately on a smaller scale, and, as the weather was still perfect, we were sorely tempted to push forward until we rejoined the river. Yet there was one feature of the town we had resolved not to miss, so we moored up and tramped through a seemingly interminable maze of mean streets until we came upon our objective, the works of Messrs. John Taylor, a small, unpretentious foundry, famous the world over as the birthplace of bells since 1366. Loughborough is justly proud of its ancient history and boasts a public official whose office is unique in England. He is the town Carillonia. I'm not sure I pronounced that right. Carillonia. Carilloneur. Carillonia. And twice a week throughout the summer months he gives recitals on what must surely be the finest war memorial in the country, a Carillion tower of 43 bells. There can be few countries which have not heard the sound of a Loughborough bell or a cathedral in England whose bells John Taylor's have not cast or recast. No bell is too small or too large for these craftsmen to tackle, from the sweet-toned handbells, once beloved of village ringers, but now, alas, all too rarely heard, to such brazen-voiced giants as Great George of Bristol, Great Peter of York Minster, and, peer of them all, Great Paul, the burden bell of St. Paul's Cathedral, which weighs no less than 16.5 tons and measures 30 feet in circumference. This enormous bell, the largest in the empire, was cast in 1881 and conveyed to London by road, certainly no mean feat at the time. Among the most notable of the more recent casts has been a peal of 14 and a burden bell Hosanna, or Hosanna, for the new Abbey of Buckfast. This foundry was full of bells of every size and for every purpose. Ship's bells, one for the new Cunarder Prince Elizabeth, bells for carillons and church bells, some destined for Catholic or monastic foundations, bearing Latin descriptions, others inscribed as memorials of persons or events. Even in the yard outside laid numerous old and discarded bells, sadly awaiting their turn to be melted down. The mould into which the bell metal is poured when the cast takes place is not made of a wooden pattern or a drawing, as is the case of ordinary foundry work. Instead, it is built upon a circular metal bed plate to the measure of a sheet metal template called a strickler. This represents an exact slice of the required bell, so that the moulder, using it as a gauge, can build up the mould and core to precisely the right contour. When this has been done, the outer mould, formed in the metal container, not unlike the bell itself, is lowered over the core, and the airspace between them being the phantom bell to which the molten metal will conform when it's poured in. When the cast has taken place, the final turning is carried out by removing a certain amount of the metal from inside the mouth of the bell. Nowadays, this process is carried out on a vertical lathe, but in the earlier days of bell founding, it was all done by the somewhat crude means described as hammer and chisel tuning, which simply consisted of chipping away the metal until the bell sounded right. Many of the old bells in the scrapyard bore evidence of this haphazard method. To anyone with a rudimentary knowledge of foundry work, the foregoing procedure is perfectly straightforward, even though it's unorthodox. The secret of the bell founder's craft is hidden in the calculations which can produce a bell to ring the desired note so accurately that only the lightest skimming on a lathe is sufficient to put it in perfect tune. We caught a momentary glimpse of this genius. A portly, bespectacled figure, incongruous. Oh, I can say the word, but I can't read it now. Incongruous. This bespectacled figure, clad, I'm going to ignore the word now, clad in blue pinstripe trousers, suede shoes, shirt sleeves, and gaudy braces, who emerged from some inner lair to listen attentively while overalled workmen, armed with hide mallets, rang several peals on a set of bells which had just arrived for recasting. What his conclusions were, and in what intricate form they would take shape at his desk, we shall never know. We only saw the bells themselves in the process of manufacture, but the massive frames in which they are hung and the slender wooden rope pulleys which lift... Why has that come to us? Sorry. It's amazing. You omit one word and the whole sentence changes. We saw not only the bells themselves in process of manufacture, but the massive frames in which they are hung and the slender rope pulleys which lift them. Most modern frames are built of steel girders, but in the joiner's shop, where machinery was conspicuous by its absence, one of the older type wooden frames was being constructed with great new-hewn beams of seasoned oak, which were a joy to behold. The employers of Messrs. John Taylor are fortunate in their craft, for the making of bells can never fall a prey to mechanized quality production, and the machines must forever be subordinate to the skill of the hand and eye. Loughborough may rightly be proud of her bells, and we did not begrudge... Oh, for goodness sake. Loughborough may rightly be proud of her bells, and we did not begrudge the hours of sunshine we spent in the foundry. And that was that chapter. I may give up this reading, Lark. I obviously can't do it terribly well. I can't get my mouth what is that sodding word? Incongruously. That doesn't sound right. Why can't I say incongruous? Carry on here. Carillion is pronounced carry on here. Yeah, you see, I can't do it. Incongruously. Is that right? In one chapter, he doesn't pre-read, had the big words in it. No, I just am ashamed. I'm just ashamed. Anyway, incongruously. No, it was fine. Yeah, I know. I'm hard on myself because I want to do it better. I want to be better at it. This is good practice. It is good practice, but it is bloody annoying. Anyway, through this process, you will see that I'm learning. But I'm not very good at it. I want to be better at it. It's like all these things. I want to be good at these things. Anyway, you're doing great. I know. I would have struggled over a lot of them. Incongruously. It is a bit of a tongue twister first thing in the morning. Perhaps I need to wake my mouth up. Anyway, it's good practice. By the time I've read a few books, I'll be a hell of a lot better at it. I just get myself frustrated. I know I get frustrated at it. And I think part of the problem is that in everyday speaking, we are very lazy with how we speak. And actually, suddenly, when you've got to read the words and a number of, a beautiful sentence which has been crafted with these very specific words with all the different consonants in them, it is amazing how the lazy act of ordinary speaking, suddenly you realise that you're not, or I realise I'm not actually pronouncing. And then, of course, you're interpreting the sentence as you go, and you're trying to give each, trying to make it interesting, and you're trying to give it pace and everything else. So this is, for those that don't know, A Shepherd's Life. Let me just tell you what this says on the back of this. This life of a simple, unchanging actions. And I keep putting words in where there are no words, which does not help, or I miss out words when I read words. And that really does not help, because that changes how you interpret the sentence. And then suddenly, like you saw me do earlier, many times, this life of simple, unchanging actions and of habits that are like instincts, of hard labour in sun and wind and rain from day to day. That doesn't make any sense either. This soaring account of rural life is a heartfelt celebration of the ordinary men and women who worked in the land in 19th century England. It is told largely through the story of Caleb Borecombe, a shepherd on the Wiltshire Downs for 50 years, son of a shepherd before him, whose memories of sheepdogs, poachers, local fairs, blacksmiths, old ballards and wild birds depict a way of life that was fast vanishing and now has vanished. To read Hudson at his best is to see the world after a heavy rain, to smell it afresh, to catch sight of its original colours and feel properly alive, says Nicholas Shakespeare. And I assume Nicholas Shakespeare is not William. Oh no, of course it isn't. Anyway, I'm going to go shamefully hide my head in a bucket of hyena offal. Don't put yourself down. You're doing well. You must. Yes, I know. It's so easy. Put the accent on con, says Diane. Hang on. Where is incongruously. That doesn't. I'm gonna have to look it up. Get someone to say it for me. Blah, 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 blah. We enjoy the reading anyway. Take care. Thank you very much for watching. And I will catch up with you later on. Yes, maybe I just stick to filming. Something I can do, I think. Until next time, look after yourself and have a good day. The sun does seem to be shining here, but I do believe there is rain. And Linda, if you do manage to get some flour, I will pay you gladly. Thank you very much. Bye-bye for now.